I recently got around to watching Netflix's adaptation of Three Body Problem, and I have to admit that I did enjoy it quite a bit. Based on Leo Sishin's first novel in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, the series follows a large cast of characters as they encounter an alien civilization. So humanity begins preparing for war, but what makes this particular alien invasion story so interesting is the fact that the aliens are approximately 400 years away. You know, on account of how big space is and how long it takes to travel through it. And that's one of the aspects I love about the show. It applies a handful of real scientific concepts into the story. So, a civilization that exists 400 light years away from its destination would take over 400 years to get to said destination, because nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. So this isn't anything like Star Wars or Star Trek, where characters can just zip across the galaxy in a matter of seconds, because in Three Body Problem, the characters have to obey the laws of physics. Most of the time anyway. But the biggest scientific concept that is featured in this show comes from the title itself, as a three-body problem refers to a mathematical concept in orbital mechanics. Specifically, it refers to the positions and velocities of three-point masses, and how difficult it is to calculate their subsequent trajectories using Newton's laws of motion and Newton's law of universal gravitation. In other words, the three-body problem is a prime example of chaos theory, as the problem itself is basically unsolvable. Because while the orbits of the three bodies may have some stable periods, most other periods are going to be unstable and appear chaotic, as in there's just no way to fully calculate the trajectories of said orbits. And while that may sound quite boring to some people, I think it is a fascinating concept to explore in a science fiction story like this one. So the aliens in this series come from a planetary system where three stars are orbiting one another, which makes sustainable habitation virtually impossible. And that makes Earth and its one sun seem very appealing for said alien race. So humanity has to brace itself for an incoming civilization that is far more advanced and is actively looking to declare war. But does the fact that they're over 400 years away put people's minds at ease? No. The revelation that we are not alone in the universe creates a huge existential problem that is only made worse by the fact that the human race could be wiped from existence in the not-so-distant future. So the 400-year timeline makes for an interesting ticking clock that is always looming over the characters in this show. I mean, if you knew the exact time of when you were going to die, how would you react? Some people may seem apathetic, but others may naturally freak the fuck out. In this show, we see people planning for military defense, we see people planning to leave the planet, we see people starting religious cults, we see people getting suicidal, and we see people getting murdered. It's quite fascinating to see so many different reactions to the discovery of an alien race. And the reason we get to see so many perspectives is because the story focuses on a large international cast of characters. In fact, there are so many characters that the show doesn't feature one central protagonist. Still, with characters played by John Bradley, Rosalind Chow, Liam Cunningham, Isa Gonzalez, Jess Hong, Alex Sharp, Benedict Wong, Jonathan Pryce, and more, Three Body Problem does feature some excellent performances. And all of their characters get plenty of time to shine, as the show does allow the characters to properly grow and develop. So I gotta give props to the showrunners of this series for making a dense story like this that is filled with confusing science concepts and a huge amount of characters so accessible for mainstream audiences. But in case you didn't know already, this series was developed by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss in their first substantial project since the end of Game of Thrones. And say what you will about the final season of Game of Thrones, I know I certainly have my issues with it, but the showrunners can develop a strong project when they really put their minds to it. That's why Game of Thrones was so successful in the first place, and that's exactly why Three Body Problem is successful now. Sure, they happen to be adapting other people's work in both instances, but these two excel at translating densely written works of fiction into a visual medium like television. Adaptations that are, again, easy for mainstream audiences to digest. That is no easy feat, so I think it's important that we acknowledge Benioff and Weiss's success in adapting literary works. Because as unsatisfied as I was with the Game of Thrones finale, I know I wouldn't be a fan of Game of Thrones in the first place if it wasn't for these two showrunners. And now, I'm a really big fan of Three Body Problem thanks to these two. I probably wouldn't read Sushin's original novels since I'm not much of a reader already, but I wouldn't mind watching the Chinese adaptation of the show, especially since I think it would be interesting to see how different cultures tackle different aspects of the story. Plus, the Netflix version isn't without its own issues. I personally found some of the dialogue to be quite clunky, certain story beats to be unbelievably implausible, and some of their visual effects to be rather lackluster. And I think it would be interesting to see how these elements would compare to a different iteration of the same story. Granted, I don't know how Netflix's adaptation compares to the original source material, so I don't know how it's resonating with fans of the book series, but if you enjoy heady sci-fi stories like I do, then I think you may also enjoy this adaptation. Because Three Body Problem is a great show. I loved its far-out sci-fi concepts, I loved the massive scope of its story, I loved all of the smaller interactions between each of the characters, and I loved the performances of everyone in this huge ensemble cast. So if it weren't for X-Men 97, then Three Body Problem would definitely be my favorite show on television right now. Which means that Netflix's adaptation of Three Body Problem would definitely get a recommendation from me. I can't wait to see more of this show, and since the novels are already finished, I think Benioff and Weiss stand a pretty good chance of sticking the landing with this series. So if you were a fan of Game of Thrones in general, then I think you should also give Three Body Problem a chance, especially since there are a lot of similarities between the two shows. A lot of actors from Game of Thrones also appear in this series. The fantasy story includes a densely populated cast of characters, and said story features an existential crisis that is looming over the horizon for its main characters. And these are all aspects that I really enjoyed from both shows. But I appreciate anyone who stuck around to hear my full thoughts on Three Body Problem, so as always, Thanks for watching.